Okay, today I'm going to show you how to change the alternator out on a 2007 Hyundai Sonata 2.4 liter engine. Got this car, tested the battery out, and the battery was dead. Completely shot, needed a new battery. Put the battery in. Car would start, but it turned over a few times and then would die unless you kept the gas going. And so I tested the alternator out, and the alternator needed to be replaced as well on top of the battery. And so I'm going to show you real quick how to test to make sure that your alternator is working, and then if it's not, what you need to do to replace it. Okay, so the easiest way to test this, and this will test your battery as well, the first thing you want to do with the car off to test your battery is you'll use this multimeter. You can pick one of these up on Amazon for like 12 bucks. They're pretty inexpensive, and they're a pretty handy tool to have for around the house and with your vehicle. But you're just going to set this to 20 dCV, and that's DC volts that it's checking. You're going to connect your black to your negative terminal and your red to the positive terminal, and make sure that you've got a solid connection. And then that should be, once you connect both of those and it runs the current through, it should be between 12.2 and 12.8. So this battery is good. And then we're going to check the alternator. Okay, so to check the alternator, you're going to do the same process, but this time when you check, you want it to sit. Okay, with the car running, you want to run the same test again, and this time you want it to be somewhere between 13.8 and 15 volts. If it's below 13.8, that means that it's not charging your battery properly when everything's running. Run this test with, I'm running this test with the lights off, the radio off, everything's off. And if I turn those on, it'll drop even lower. So I know that this alternator is not giving enough power to the battery, and eventually the battery is going to drain too quickly, and all the headlights are going to run dim. So that's the issue that we're facing right now. If it's above 15 volts, then you're sending too much power to your electronics and you could fry something. So that's another situation where you'd want to change out the alternator. Okay, so anytime you're working with electricity or anything electrical in the vehicle, you want to disconnect the negative battery terminal. So this is just a 10 millimeter socket. So we're just going to twist this off. It should twist pretty easy. And then you don't even have to pull it all the way off, and just wiggle it off. Okay, so the next step for me, so this is the alternator. It's down here, buried. This guy right here. And so there's a few things that we're going to have to do in order to get to it and to get it out. So the first thing is we're going to have to disconnect the coolant hose here that runs into the radiator. And then this is the power steering fluid pump right here. And so this hose that runs the power steering fluid hose, I'm going to disconnect it here. And that's going to give us some access to A, be able to get to it, and then B, to be able to pull it out eventually. So you can use needle nose pliers to take off this hose. I have these nifty little pliers that you can use to remove hoses. They make your life a whole lot easier. But basically you're just going to take the top and slip it over here, and then bring this around, and this will open up or close or open up pretty easy once you do that. And then this hose will slide off, but there is going to be some coolant in this hose, and so it's a good idea if you can fit a little cup down in below to catch some of it so it doesn't drip all over. And then if you've got a bag, so I usually keep a little baggie with a hair tie or a rubber band and wrap it around the hose and this mouth, well I guess the mouth right here, because I can put the hose up so that the fluid, the coolant doesn't drip out. But if you have a little baggie that you can wrap around there with a rubber band, that'll keep it from spilling out all over you while you're doing the work. Okay, you can see that I've got the radiator hose off, this upper radiator hose off. I'm going to leave the power steering hose alone. I think that this will probably give me enough space to pull out the alternator. But if I do run into anything else, this will probably be the first thing to come out, just to make sure that I have enough space. Okay, so I was able to get the serpentine belt off. Here's the tensioner. It's a 17 millimeter tensioner. And you're just gonna get it around right there. and then push it that way toward the firewall to loosen the tension on the serpentine belt. Okay, you can see on this part that there's 2 bolts that need to be removed. So this is the new part. I'll show you on the vehicle now where it is. Okay, so this is the first bolt that needs to be pulled out. It's a 14 millimeter, and so we're gonna have to be able to get in there. It's a tight fit, but to get our socket wrench around that. And you can see I've got my wheel off here, and we're gonna pull this. There's a couple of bolts that need to be pulled out up here and here, and we can just kind of peel this back a little bit, and then we'll get back in here. And the second bolt that we're gonna have to get out is right back in here. And so I'll show you how to pull both of those out. Just barely fits in there. And so I've got just enough leverage, I think, to be able to get this out. So I'm just gonna pull up on this. All right, and then once it's loose, then you're just gonna slowly take this bolt out. And eventually you'll get there, and then it'll just slide right out. And hang on to it, because you're gonna need to put it back in just a minute to get this the rest of the way out. Okay, so before I go down and remove the bottom bolt, I'm gonna remove this electric plug right here. And there's just you're just gonna push down on the front of this until you hear a click. And then once you hear the click, you can start kind of wiggling it around and pulling it out. I used a flathead to just get a little bit of leverage right here to pull this back out, but you'll want to disconnect this as well before the alternator comes out. There's one other piece to disconnect down here. You'll see it just connected to the front. It's just to hold the wiring in place. So if you just get some needle nose pliers and just work it back and forth a little bit, it'll pull right out. And then just one more piece to disconnect, just to get everything out of the way. There's a little button just down underneath, a little clip, and if you just push up on the clip and wiggle this back and forth, it'll pull right out. So again, this one, you're gonna come in from underneath, so you gotta take that wheel off and get back in here, and then same thing, you're just gonna get this on and pull straight down. And you may need a little bit of PB blaster or something to spray on there if your bolt's on there real tight. But again, it's just 14 millimeters again on the bottom. And twist that off enough and it'll come right off. So once you've got that nut off, just make sure that you, let's see, focus in there. Just make sure that you slide that the rest of the way off. You can pull that boot back, slide it the rest of the way off, and then you're all disconnected. So I was having a hard time getting mine out, but I was just able to fit a pry bar back there, and in order to make sure I'm not damaging anything, I just shook it lightly, and it actually came out a lot easier that way. So just by sliding a little pry bar back there and giving just a little bit of leverage, I was able to get it to slide out. So there's a trick that I've seen on getting this alternator out, where once you get the top part out, you stick the bolt back in and then slide a wrench around it. And then you're just gonna, let me see if I can get a good angle. You're just gonna work it around there and then pry on it, get a little bit of leverage, and just work it back and forth because it doesn't want to come out of the bottom. And once you work it back and forth, I can feel it already moving a little bit more. And I'm gonna have to put the camera down to get it the rest of the way out, but it seems to be coming out more, a little by little, and because it's pretty stuck. Okay, so I did a little bit of work with the pry bar and with the method of having the bolt across and just working it back and forth. And so eventually it got loose on the bite down below. And so now I just need to pull it up and out. I think that there's enough clearance, and so I'm gonna try to get it up and out right now.
Okay, so the alternator is now out. And so now it's just a matter of putting everything back together. If you have any questions about which things to put back in what order, you can just go back through the video in the order that you, just a reverse order of what you took out before. That's what you want to put back together.
Okay, so after you get everything put back together, you can run your test with your multimeter again. So you can see now that my output DCB is up at 14. So like I said, you need to be between 13.8 and 15. So this is a lot better. Make sure that you turn off the radio, the air conditioning, everything in your vehicle before you run this test. Otherwise it may come out a little bit lower. But with everything off, it should be between 13.8 and 15. Once you get everything put back together and you start your car up, if it sounds like it's going to die, or it does die right off the start, don't be too concerned about that. That's something that can occur as your computer adjusts to the new output. So just give it a little gas, give it a little time, start it up, put it in neutral, give it a little bit more gas, and then eventually it should be up and running. But don't freak out if after you put it in it doesn't start up as usual right away, or it starts up and dies. Give it a little bit of time, try to drive it around a little bit, and then you should be running well. And then this test with the multimeter is kind of what gives you your final answer if everything is running well. If it's still not between 13.8 and 15, the other thing I would suggest is to check the fuse. So check the fuse that runs between your alternator and your battery, because that is another area where you may not be getting the power running all the way through. So that's one more place you can check out. Hopefully this was helpful. If it was, give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I'll have more helpful DIY tips on the Hyundai Sonata, and also on Mazda vehicles. So if that's of interest to you or will be of help, please subscribe.